It was exactly 5:30 in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkinafaso. Dawn had not yet broken when an extraordinary commotion began outside Captain Ibrahim Traoré's private residence. Dozens of military vehicles were silently lined up, hundreds of soldiers completing their final preparations. No one yet knew that the next 48 hours would change the fate of West Africa, create an earthquake effect in international diplomacy, and occupy the headlines of the world press for weeks to come. Traoré perhaps could not fully grasp the dimensions of the decision he made that morning. But as he worked at his desk throughout the night, looking at the map in front of him, the French military base stationed in the heart of Burkina Faso's territory, just 30 kilometers from the capital, seemed to challenge him like a defiant symbol. Kati had been the largest symbol of French military presence in Burkina Faso since 2022, and Traoré had decided to confront this symbol that morning. The preparation of the convoy took exactly 3 hours, 150 military vehicles, 3,000 soldiers, and the most modern equipment of the Burkina Faso army. Traoré's decision to make such a large show of force had crystallized after the intelligence reports he received in the hours connecting night to morning. What was written in the report had deeply shaken both Traoré and his close circle. The routes of aircraft departing from the French base in the last 2 weeks, secret meetings held at the base, and most importantly, the mysterious guest who came to the base last night. Everything confirmed Traoré's suspicions. At 6 a.m., the convoy moved out. The sound of military vehicles passing through Ouagadougou's quiet streets was awakening the city. The people looking out from windows had never seen such large military activity before. When the first photos began to be shared on social media, no one yet knew where the convoy was heading. But when Traoré's determined facial expression was seen through the window of the leading armored vehicle, it was understood that this morning would not be an ordinary morning. Kati bus had begun its usual routine with the first light of morning. While French soldiers moved to breakfast after their morning exercise, radar operators were at their posts. The base commander, Colonel Marc Dubois, was receiving the day's first intelligence summary, as he did every morning. But this morning was different. The first signals from radar showed that a large convoy was approaching the base. Dubois' first thought was that it was a routine Burkina Faso army exercise. After all, there were coordination protocols between the two counts armies. However, the size and route of the convoy caused alarm bells to ring. The first report, arriving at the base at 7:15, was shocking. The convoy was heading directly toward Kati base, and no coordination request had been received. Tubi's immediately tried to reach the military attaché in Ouagadougou. The phone kept ringing, but no one was answering. This was not normal. At all that 7:30, the first elements of the convoy reached the outer perimeter security points of Kati base. Traoré's vehicle was at the front, followed by countless military vehicles and soldiers. French security forces didn't know what to do, waiting for orders from their commanders. Such a scenario was not covered in any security protocol. Moreover, they were facing the de facto leader of Burkina Faso when Traoré got out of his vehicle. The silence around him seemed deafening. French soldiers didn't know how to hold their weapons, while Burkina soldiers lined up behind their leader. There were only a few meters between the two counts' militaries, but this distance felt like kilometers. At this moment, phones began ringing in various European capitals, while an emergency meeting was being called at the Élysée Palace in Paris. Red alert was activated at NATO headquarters in Brussels, at the Pentagon in Washington. The Africa desk began monitoring developments minute by minute. The world didn't yet know what was happening at this small French base in the heart of Burkina Faso. But everyone would learn this name in the coming hours. Traoré stood in front of the main gate of the French base. Behind him were 3,000 soldiers. In front of him were bewildered French security forces. He had an official document in his hand, and the content of this document would create an earthquake effect in world diplomacy. Just a few hours later, the document was not a Burkina Faso government request for French military presence to withdraw from the country's territory. This was something much different, much bolder, and much riskier. At 8 a.m., Traoré began speaking through a megaphone. He wanted to ensure his voice reached every corner of the base. The first sentence of his speech would shock both French soldiers and the world. "I am Captain Ibrahim Traoré, speaking on behalf of the people of Burkinafaso. This base is now under the control of the Burkinafaso army." The moment this sentence was uttered, phones around the world began going crazy. Colonel Dubois was drenched in sweat when he heard Traoré's words. The 57-year-old experienced officer had experienced many crises during his 30-year career in the French army. He had served in Mali, Afghanistan, Iraq, but he had never encountered such a situation. Facing him was not an enemy force, but the leader of a country that was supposed to be an ally. International law, diplomacy, NATO protocols. None of them provided guidance for such a scenario. Dubois's first reflex was to immediately call Paris, but the phone lines were jammed at the Elysée Palace. At the Foreign Ministry, at the Defense Ministry, everyone was trying to receive the same news at the same time. It was 8:15 in the morning, and France's top officials had just finished their breakfast. No one was prepared to face such a surprise. Traoré continued his speech through the megaphone. His voice was calm, but determined. "These lands are Burkina Faso territory. All personnel and equipment located at this base will be kept under the security of the Burkina Faso army. No one will be harmed. However, the status of this base has now changed." Whispers were rising among the French soldiers. Some wanted to reach for their weapons, but their commanders had not yet given orders. Dubois knew he could not make such a critical decision alone. A clash between the 400 French soldiers at the base and the 3,000 Burkinabe soldiers facing them could be not just a local disaster, but the beginning of an international war. Meanwhile, media members began gathering around the base. Local television channels had set off toward Kati, following clues they received from social media. The first live broadcast came from Burkinafaso television. Viewers who saw the size of the convoy couldn't hide their astonishment. Commentators didn't know what to say because such a thing had never happened before. When the first videos began to be shared on social media, it started attracting attention worldwide. The hashtags #, Katiba's #, Traoré #, Burkinafaso began trending in West Africa, while also starting to be followed in Europe and America. BBC, CNN, France, 24 editors began preparing to send emergency news teams. At 8:30, an emergency meeting began at the Elysée Palace in Paris. President Emmanuel Macron, the Prime Minister, Defense Minister, Foreign Minister, and intelligence chiefs gathered around the table. The atmosphere at the table was tense and uncertain. Everyone was asking different questions, offering different options. What does Traoré want? Is this a bluff? What will happen to French soldiers? How will the international community react? Macron gave a clear instruction at the beginning of the meeting. Priority is the safety of French military personnel. We will not engage in any provocation, but we will also protect France's prestige. This seemingly simple instruction was actually very complex. How far could France step back? To what extent could it accept Traoré's demands? Meanwhile, a similar meeting was taking place at NATO headquarters in Brussels. As the NATO Secretary General put the developments at Gaiety Base on the table, disagreements began to emerge among allies. While Germany and Italy advocated for resolving the situation through diplomatic channels, the United Kingdom and the United States suggested a tougher stance as Traoré waited at the base gate. The military force behind him had silently taken positions. This positioning was not coincidental. The most experienced officers of the Burkinafaso Army had implemented the base encirclement operation within minutes. Every exit of the base was brought under control, and airspace also began to be monitored by Burkina forces. At 9 a.m., Touba finally managed to contact Paris. The instruction he received was clear. Do not escalate the situation. Ensure the safety of French personnel. Tried to negotiate with Traoré. This instruction was both relieving and difficult for Dubois. It was relieving because the risk of armed conflict had decreased. It was difficult because he didn't know how to negotiate. Dubois began walking toward the main gate of the base. Behind him were two officers. In front of him was the leader of burkinafaso. This walk was perhaps the most critical moment of his career. With each step, he was thinking not only about his own future, but also about the relations between the two countries. When Traoré saw Dubois, he greeted him with a calm attitude. The first eye contact between the two leaders took place in front of thousands of soldiers around them. Dubois began speaking in French, but Traoré responded in English. Even this small detail showed how the balance of power had changed. Colonel Dubois said, Traoré, there are matters I want to discuss with you, but first let me state this. Neither you nor your men are in danger. This should be done in a spirit of cooperation. Dubois's response was diplomatic but helpless. Captain Traoré, this base is protected by international agreements. Such an action could lead to a diplomatic crisis. Traoré's smile was both sincere and determined. Colonel, there is already a diplomatic crisis. We are just trying to correct it. While this conversation was taking place, the world press began flocking toward Kati base. International news agencies gave orders to send their closest correspondents to Africa, to the region. Correspondents from Reuters, AFP agencies set off from Ouagadougou toward Kati. At 10 o'clock, the first international reaction came. The statement from the French Foreign Ministry was brief but clear. We are closely monitoring developments in Burkina Faso. Ensuring the safety of French personnel is our priority. We expect the situation to be resolved through diplomatic channels. This statement showed how difficult a position France was in. It could neither take too harsh a stance nor too soft. A statement that would anger Traoré could endanger French soldiers. Too soft a statement could undermine France's prestige. The African Union also began convening during these hours. At the O headquarters in Addis Ababa, ambassadors of member countries requested an emergency meeting. The developments at Katibas were not just a Burkina Faso France issue, but a situation that could affect the future of all Africa. The first meeting between Traoré and Dubois lasted 1 hour. In this meeting, Traoré clearly laid out his demands. These demands were the transfer of Katibas to the Burkina Faso army, a timeline for the withdrawal of French military presence from the country, and complete independence in Burkina Faso's security policies. Dubois said he could not directly meet these demands and needed to consult with Paris. Traoré stated he was patient but determined. I am giving you 24 hours, Colonel. You can consult with your superiors during this time. This 24-hour period was of critical importance for world diplomacy. France, NATO, EU, and UN all activated simultaneously. Diplomatic channels began working. Rapidly, telephone diplomacy reached its peak in Paris. Macron called Angela Merkel. He was trying to seek Germany's support in Berlin. However, Germany's response was cold. Merkel had long criticized France's Africa policy and thought this crisis was also the result of problems France had created itself. In London, Boris Johnson displayed a more supportive attitude. But there was not much the UK could practically do. Post-Brexit Britain had lost its influence in Europe. In Washington, the situation was more complex. The Biden administration was concerned about the increasing influence of China and Russia in Africa. It was calculating whether Traoré's move would further increase this influence. At 1400 hours in the afternoon, second development occurred at Kati bus. Traoré announced that he wanted to speak with the French soldiers inside the base. This request put Dubois in a very difficult position. His soldiers' morale was already low. Traoré speaking directly with them could cause even more confusion. However, Traoré's request could not be refused. Through the loudspeaker system set up in the base courtyard, Traoré spoke with the French soldiers. His speech was a mixture of English and French. "Dear soldiers, we have no personal hostility toward you. You are doing your duty, and we are protecting our own country's interests. Your safety is guaranteed throughout this process. You can communicate with your families. Your basic needs will be met." This speech found wide resonance in international media. Traoré's gentleman behavior nullified propaganda efforts trying to portray him as an aggressive leader. The hashtag #respectful resistance began trending on social media. In the evening hours, the number of journalists camping around Kati base exceeded 100. International media began following this crisis minute by minute. BBC World, CNN International, France 24, RTL Jazeera, all were trying to broadcast live from Kati. This media attention was advantageous for Traoré. World public opinion was seeing the developments with their own eyes. It was visible to everyone that French soldiers were not harmed, that Traoré was behaving respectfully, and that the situation was under control. At 2000 hours, a second emergency meeting was held in Paris. Macron's stress was clearly visible in this meeting. France was under pressure both domestically and abroad. Domestically, French public opinion was concerned about the safety of soldiers abroad. Support from allies was less than expected. 3 different options were discussed in the meeting. First, trying to retake the base through military intervention. However, this option was considered too risky. Second, negotiating with Traoré to make a gradual withdrawal plan. Third, involving the international community to exert diplomatic pressure. Macron preferred the second option. France's prestige was important, but the safety of French soldiers was more important. A negotiable withdrawal plan would both save the soldiers and preserve France's honor. This decision was communicated to Dubois at midnight. Second-round negotiations with Traoré would begin the next morning. In these negotiations, France was revealing its intention to step back for the first time. On the morning of the second day, the atmosphere around Kati bus had changed. The media had relatively calmed down. Hopes for a diplomatic solution had increased. Traoré agreed to meet with Dubois early in the morning. In this second meeting, Dubois spoke with the authority he received from Paris. "Captain Traoré, my government is open to negotiation. However, we want some guarantees. Safe withdrawal of French personnel, the status of equipment, and future cooperation possibilities." Traoré's response was positive. "Colonel, we also want to be constructive. Gradual withdrawal within 3 months. Safe transfer of valuable equipment and cooperation on the basis of equal partnership in the future are possible." This negotiation process was detailed in the afternoon. Both sides brought in their lawyers and diplomats. International media announced this development as the Great Reconciliation. In the evening hours, a preliminary agreement was signed. Traoré and Dubois shook hands in front of the world press. This photograph became a symbol of a new era in Africa-Europe relations. 3 months later, the last French soldier also left Burkinafaso. Kati bus was transferred to the Burkina Faso army. Traoré gained international prestige during this process. His position in African leadership was strengthened. France, on the other hand, learned important lessons from this crisis. It decided to review its Africa policy. It understood that habits from the colonial period could no longer be sustained. The Kati crisis produced both local and global results. Locally, Burkina Faso's independence was consolidated. Globally, a new paradigm began in Africa-Europe relations. This crisis also showed how modern diplomacy works. Social media, international media, public opinion pressure all influenced the course of the crisis. Traditional diplomacy alone was no longer sufficient. Traoré's strategy was not just using military force. Media management, public opinion support, international image. He had calculated all of them. This was one of the factors that made him successful. In conclusion, the Kati-based crisis became an example of how small countries could struggle against great powers in the 21st century. With smart strategy, media support, and correct use of international public opinion, David could defeat Goliath. This story showed Africa's changing face and the bold steps of its young leaders. Traoré made a move that would affect not only his country, but the entire continent, and this move had been successful in a way that would go down in history. The Kati-based crisis would henceforth be taught in international relations courses, studied in diplomacy and become a reference point in African studies. Because this crisis was not just a disagreement between two countries, but had become a symbol of the changing dynamics of the age.